that first set of slides in the discussion of biogeography left off with a map that talked about where some of these big biomes are. And what I hope you saw was that the different biomes existed on multiple continents or multiple locations, but generally across the same latitudes. All right. So we've got that variable. We'll talk about the reason for that now, which is environmental adaptation. And so what's happening here is that the species that are found in these locations, both the plants and the animals, but we're going to kind of limit this to the plants for the start of this discussion, is that those species locations are driven by something called function and structure. And in order to exist in a particular location, you have to be able to function there. And in order to function there, you have to have the right structure. So when we think of function in ecosystems and with species, the function of all species is to capture energy, store that energy, and move that energy along. So the first captures of energy are our blue-green algae and our tree species that are going to take in solar energy. We're going to convert that solar energy into sugars and mass in the form of leaves and plant structure. And it's in those leaves and the plant structure that we're storing that energy as a sugar. And then from that, somebody else is going to benefit from that structure. Animals might come along and graze on that vegetation. Deer may browse on bushes. Those leaves may fall later in a season or over the course of a plant's lifetime, decay, and that decayed matter is going to offer nutrients for other organisms, microorganisms, and maybe even for that same plant later on. So we're transferring that energy through the system to other organisms whose structure is able to take it up. So the deer is structured so it can eat particular plants. It's got particularly long legs. That structure in terms of its skull shape allows it to eat particular plants. But part of that structure and that function is also to store that energy and to replicate so that the energy can be produced again and again over and over, which means reproduction. So, and you've got to survive. So that deer is going to have survival structure as well. Those long legs are going to allow it to hopefully escape from predators who, importantly enough, have to consume those prey in order to transfer the matter, which is really sunlight, across the system again and again. And we'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later, but that's function. Function is the transfer and storage of energy. Structure is how you're capturing that energy, how you're storing that energy, and how it gets then transferred on somewhere else. All of those things, both the function and the structure, are dictated by something called limiting factors. And a limiting factor is what is going to prohibit a plant or an animal from existing in a particular location. So the big limiting factors are moisture. Is there too much moisture? Is there too little moisture? How does that moisture come? Does it come in the form of rain? Does it come in the form of snow? When does that moisture come? Does it come at the right or the wrong time? Is there too little of it sometime during the year and too much of it another time of the year? The plants that exist in every location are completely adapted to how that moisture comes in and how much of it comes in and when it comes in. So if it comes in as snow and there's too much snow for a particular species, that species is going to suffer. It might break its limbs, and if the wound on that plant is too great, then it's not going to survive. So the limiting factor is the ability to withstand particular types of moisture conditions. The same thing for heat or solar energy. Is there too much? Is there too little? Is it occurring at the wrong time? All the plants and animals are adapted to how that energy through solar energy is coming in. Competition, who is in competition with you based on what your needs are, what your limiting factors are. And that competition can be met with timing. You may germinate in the spring, but your competitor germinates in the fall. So you're limiting that competition through those factors, right? You're going to not compete with another plant or not compete with another animal through when you germinate or when you reproduce or when you pollinate. So there are conditions like that. Additional limiting factors can include pH. So what's the soil chemistry? What is the salinity in water bodies? Is it too salty, not salty enough? We could be considering what are codependent species relationships. Does the species that you depend on, can it meet the environmental factors in this particular location? There's a great plant called the yucca plant that occurs across North America and has a northern occurrence into Saskatchewan and Alberta. And it can actually live further north, even though it's we consider it to be a tropical, semi-arid, arid plant. And it does really well. It can withstand really cold winter temperatures and it can withstand the snow, but it doesn't occur any further north because it's dependent upon one moth. And that moth that cannot withstand those cold temperatures and it cannot withstand the cold. So it's codependent with a species that has other limiting factors. So there's some of those. So I hope that I've been able to articulate limiting factors well enough for you. Basically, it comes down to, is there too much or too little of something that keeps that plant and that animal from occurring in those locations? So if we were to look at our global map again, what we find if we start in the northern hemisphere at high latitudes with tundra, the plants that are going to exist up here are tolerant to really cold temperatures. We also know that there's not a lot of light up here in the winter time. So they're tolerant to low-level summer light, and they're tolerant of zero light conditions at some times of the year. And we know that this is a high pressure zone. So we know that there's very little moisture. So they're tolerant of low moisture conditions. If we come towards the equator, to the boreal and the taiga, this is sort of Christmas tree land. Think of this as all conifer trees. So we're talking about spruce and pine trees. The tolerant organism is, the more moisture there is. So this is got more moisture than the tundra has. So we've got a little bit more moisture through here. The temperatures are a little bit warmer as we move farther south. All right, as we come into maybe the United States proper and parts of southern Canada, starting with the east coast, we've got the deciduous, and the deciduous sits right here next to the Atlantic for North America, and it sits in Europe next to the Atlantic, but it penetrates really far inland. And that's because this is where we've got our hardwoods, and our hardwoods need moisture. And that moisture is coming from all of these water bodies that are tangled in and penetrate deep into Europe and parts of Asia, with the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, the Mediterranean. We've got the North Sea up here. So the westerly winds are able to push all this moisture deep, deep into Russia and extend the the deciduous species further inland. Here we've got lots and lots of the same deciduous. We're talking oaks and elms and maples. Here, oaks, elms, and maples here, oaks, elms, and maples here, and down here in Australia and New Zealand as well. And this moisture is coming in. Remember Coriolis effect, that we're rotating up this way and we're bringing it in from the Gulf and penetrating inland right here. As we look further to the center of continents, we're going to lose moisture. That moisture then is going to then limit what species can exist. So with the loss of moisture in these mid states, we're going to have grasslands. So think of Kansas, Iowa, Nebraska, the Dakotas, Montana. Is all this grassland landscape. There just isn't enough moisture penetrating deep inland from the Coriolis effect this way, and across with the westerly winds, these mountain ranges are going to capture that moisture, so these are going to be in the rain shadow, so we're not going to have enough moisture to support trees, so we have grasslands. We see the same grasslands out here in the steppes of the Ukraine and across Uzbekistan and through Russia. All right, so these are dry steppes, grasslands, and then we've got steppes here which are even drier. This little sliver through here, a sliver through here. I'm going to leave the alpine to last. All right, guys. Temperate rainforests, we know that Coriolis moves moisture this way, so we're going to penetrate and we're going to deliver lots and lots of moisture across these mid-latitudes here. Rotate here, lots and lots of moisture through here. We've got a strong delineation between temperate rainforests and then Mediterranean here, and that's because we have got a temperature regime change. So the temperate rainforest is going to bring lots and lots of moisture, and we're going to see that in like sequoia trees. But Southern California through to northern Chile, we sit in a high pressure zone, and that high pressure zone means we don't have any moisture. So this is dry shrublands through here, through most of the Mediterranean, the southern parts of Australia, and the southern part of South Africa. All right. So this is kind of the patterns that we're looking at here. So I'm hoping that you're seeing this relationship between temperature and moisture and where these species are falling out. Lots and lots of diversity at these mid-latitudes because we've got 4 seasons. So with that diversity in seasons comes diversity in ecosystem and biome structure through here. So it's not as nice and clear and linear as we have up here in the high north locations, or nice and linear as you see in Africa here, and a little less obvious here, but we've kind of got similar linear associations. It gets confusing because we've got the Andes here that interrupt that, but we would see linear features across here as well. Again, drivers here is temperature, drivers here is moisture. The temperature across the equator, the equator is right here, guys, right? So right here, lots and lots of sunlight every day, 12 hours, very little variance, as you remember from that first homework, through to this part of Africa and the southern part of the United States. So the difference here is not sunlight, but moisture. High moisture, we've got a tropical rainforest. We start to lose moisture seasonally, so we get savanna, and then we lose moisture even more so at this 30 degrees latitude mark, and then we've got a dry, hot desert, and we can see those same patterns across. All right, because we don't have a lot of landscape in the southern hemisphere, the patterns are a little less obvious, but for the most part, I want you to recognize that through here is all still a mid-latitude, all right? Right through here about where it says semi-arid, mid-latitude. So Australia is a mid-latitude continent, similar to what we've got out here in the United States. Okay,